Hello, my name is Dennis, and welcome to my trailer park white trash mobile home kitchen. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. For this video, I want to experiment with a little bit of a complicated recipe today. If I'm pronouncing this correctly in Italian, it's Baked Bisceglie Pasta. I love those European romantic languages. They only pronounce half the consonants in any word. It looks like bisceglie, but they pronounce it, if I'm doing this correctly, bisceglie. It's a baked pasta. I've wanted to do this because my mom never made baked pasta. The only baked pasta she ever made was lasagna. And this one looks pretty good. This is actually now the evening before. If you look at the clock, 6:12. I don't get out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm retired. I don't get out of bed till 8. So I'm doing the ragù the night before, because that's always better the next day anyway. So let's get into the ingredients that I'm going to use for making my ragù. For the ragù, I'm using 1/4 cup, which is about 60 milliliters of olive oil, 1 small celery stalk, which will be finely chopped, 1 medium carrot finely chopped, and 1 medium onion finely chopped, 1 clove of garlic that I'll be running through a garlic press, 1½ ounces or about 45 grams of prosciutto. Try to get this all in one piece if you can so that you can cube it nicely. It's usually sold sliced paper thin, but it's a lot easier to get a nice dice if it's in one piece. Salt and freshly ground pepper to taste. 1/2 pound or 225 grams of ground beef. 1/2 cup or 125 milliliters of dry white wine. I'm going to be using about 1 tablespoon of my tomato paste here, and then get 1/4, about 1 kilogram of either tomato puree. I'm using Italian tomatoes. So those are the ingredients for my ragù. I have a large saucepan heating on the stove. That's my olive oil in there. That should be just about up to temperature. I want to hear it sizzle, and it's not quite sizzling yet. This is a large saucepan. It takes a while for it to heat up. And that is just starting to sizzle. So my onions are in there, my carrot and celery. I'm going to crush my garlic in there. Maybe 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And some fresh ground black pepper. Okay. And I want to cook these for about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. I want to cook these for quite a while. I should just begin to see these starting to brown. You can see some browning there. That's what I want. This was exactly 20 minutes. So now I'm going to add my ground beef rather. And my chopped prosciutto. And I'm going to cook this for maybe another 5 minutes. I just want to cook this meat. I don't really need to brown it. I just need to get it cooked. I did turn my heat down to medium-low. I'm raising my heat again up to medium to cook this meat. My meat now has been cooking for 10 minutes. I want to draw your attention to that nice brown fond on the bottom of the pan. Those brown bits are what are going to become part of my sauce. This is the reason why I'm adding the wine at this point. The wine will dissolve all that. You can see how it's all stirring up. It'll dissolve it, and that'll become a part of the flavor of my sauce. So this wine has to cook in there for about 5 minutes, and then I'll be ready to add my tomatoes. Okay, this has been cooking for a further 10 minutes with the wine in there. Look how clean the bottom of that pan is. See, that's why you add that wine is that lifts all that delicious fond off the bottom of the pan. Now I'm going to put my tomatoes in there. Again, these are whole tomatoes. This is not puree. And as that cooks, I'll go in here and break this down once in a while. And I want to add about a tablespoon. I'm just going to put a big glop of my tomato paste in there. Stir that in, raise my heat up to medium. I'm going to bring this up to a boil, then reduce it to low. Put the lid on this and simmer this really slowly for about an hour. What I'll probably do, and I often do this, is I take one of my grates off the stove. These lift up, and I stack them. I'll stack 2 of these grates to get this up higher off the heat so that I know it will just simmer really slowly and I reduce the risk of any scorching. I'll watch this, and if I think this needs some moisture, I'll add a few tablespoons of water to this once in a while if it needs it. Okay, so I'll watch that. When that comes up to a boil, I'll reduce my heat to low and simmer that for an hour. Ooh. There is my sauce. Beautiful. Okay, this has been cooking for an hour. I'll need to adjust this for salt. That's a nice ragu. It is like perfect. Just a perfect consistency. I can't wait to finish this recipe tomorrow. So there's my ragu done the evening before. What time is it? It's almost 9 o'clock. So I started around 6-ish, 3 hours, and I took my time doing various things along the way. Tomorrow I'll make the meatballs. I'll cook the rigatoni. And then I'll be ready to start assembling my Baked Bisceglie Pasta. This is probably going to be really delicious. I'm excited about it. I can hardly wait until tomorrow. So here we are now the following day. Yesterday I wore my red shirt with the green inside. This is the green with the red inside. This is the twin to yesterday's shirt. If you haven't figured it out by now, I also know how to tailor. In fact, many of the shirts you see in these videos have been designed and tailored by me. But let's get into the meatballs. For these meatballs, I've made some changes. The original was some of the weirdest meatballs I've ever seen. They were only a ½ an inch in size. I mean, they were like pellets. I don't need a meatball the size of your fist. That's how big my mother made them. I'm going to make just traditional size meatballs. Also, the original didn't use pork. Traditional Italian meatballs are pork and beef. Sometimes they're veal, pork, and beef. And these meatballs weren't rolled in breadcrumbs before they were fried. Usually you do that, you get a nicer browning. So I'm going to change the recipe a little bit. But first, let's get into the ingredients that I'm going to be using to make my meatballs. So for my meatballs, I have 1/2 pound, which is 225 grams of ground beef, and 1/2 pound, 225 grams of ground pork. And then I have 1/2 cup of grated Romano cheese, that's about 65 grams. 2 tablespoons fine dry breadcrumbs. I'll be using more to roll the meatballs in. 6 tablespoons finely chopped parsley, and that's loose 6 tablespoons, not packed real tight tablespoons. 2 eggs, salt and pepper to taste, and then finally I'll be using oil to fry my meatballs in. So those are the rather simple ingredients for my meatballs. This next step is pretty simple. You just combine all your ingredients. The meat, there's my Romano cheese, parsley flakes, breadcrumbs, and there's my 2 eggs that I've beaten lightly. I want to put a little bit of pepper in there, salt rather right now, maybe ½ a teaspoon of salt, and then crank some black pepper in there. And then this, you just get your hands in there, or if you want to use a spoon, you can. I use my hands. Get all of this combined. Okay, so there's my meat. I'm going to wash my hands here and then start shaping these to make my meatballs. Okay, here's a little trick for you. How do you adjust this for salt if you don't want to taste the raw meat? 99% of you probably already know, but the little trick is you take a little piece of this, fry it in your oil. I have oil heating on the stove, and then you taste that cooked piece. I didn't have to adjust this for salt. My meatballs are fine the way they are. So I'm going to start shaping my meatballs, and I'm going to make meatballs that are not going to be ½ inch, but about 1.5 inches. I want kind of a smallish, comfortable meatball. Roll that around in breadcrumbs. And there's my meatball. I've got a tray here that's lined with parchment paper. I'm going to get all my meatballs shaped first and coated, and then I'll be frying them at the stove. I got 15 meatballs out of that. I am heating oil on the stove. I'm going to fry these in hot oil that I'm going to keep the temperature between 350 and 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 175 to 190 degrees centigrade. So there's my oil heating on the stove. I want to very carefully lower these into the oil. I'm going to do maybe half of these at a time. I don't want to cool my oil down so much that these won't cook. And you just want to cook these until they're nicely browned on both sides. I have enough oil in this pan that I can keep at least half the meatballs submerged into the oil. So there are my meatballs, nicely browned. This only took a few minutes. I turned them every minute or so. These now are ready to assemble my baked bisceglie pasta. I have my pasta here. This is 1 pound or 450 grams of rigatoni. These seem kind of small to me for rigatoni. They had larger rigatoni in the store, but I went with the smaller one because I thought this would work better in a casserole. Then I have 1 cup, which is 135 grams of grated Romano cheese. I'm using Romano, you can use Parmesan. I have 1/2 pound or 150 grams of mortadella, finely chopped. Mortadella is the Italian name for what we call here in the USA bologna or bologna. Normally I would hesitate to use bologna in this dish, but I like the spiciness of this, and this is the traditional recipe that I'm working from. It says to use mortadella. If you don't want to use mortadella or bologna, you could substitute with prosciutto. I think cooked Italian sausage would be good. Even some cubed up hard salami would be good in this. But mortadella in this recipe is traditional. And then I have 3/4 pounds, which is about 2 3/4 cups or 330 grams of finely chopped, cubed, diced mozzarella cheese. I'll be using finely ground pepper in my dish, and then of course finally I have my meatballs. I'll be using those in the casserole as well. So those are my ingredients to finish my dish. I've been heating some water up to the boil. I added some salt. Put my rigatoni in there. Give that a stir. I'm going to bring that back up to the boil and then cook that for about 11 to 12 minutes. I want it al dente. The original recipe called for using a rectangular 9 by 13 inch or 23 by 34 centimeter glass baking dish. I don't like my casseroles flat. I like them high and deep, so I'm using my round ceramic dish that I have oiled with olive oil. I'll be using this to build my baked bisceglie pasta. There's my cooked rigatoni. I'm going to add some olive oil to this. and maybe a good ladle full of sauce. And stir this around just to lightly coat that so that it won't stick. To get started here, I want to put a good ladle full of my sauce on the bottom of this dish. And scoop about 1/3 of my pasta in there. Put some of my mozzarella cheese in. Romano. A little bit more. Another molecule or two. And then finally, about half of this mortadella. Then I'm going to press some of these meatballs in. Let's see. Okay, that's my first layer. Now I'm going to add more of my sauce. Trying to get that mixed around pretty well. Again, another 1/3 of my pasta. More of my mozzarella. Romano. Saving some for the top. And finally the last of the mortadella. Now, I'm going to move my meatballs here. These I'm going to kind of put in the center a little bit. Like so. Some more of my sauce. The last of my pasta. And then the last of my sauce on top. Nicely arranged. My mozzarella in there, a little bit around the edges. And the last of my Romano over the top. Meanwhile, I'm heating my oven to 400 degrees. This has to bake 45 minutes to an hour. Get the last of my Romano in there. So there is my casserole. The directions do not say whether or not to cover this. I feel like I should cover this so that the top doesn't dry out if it's going to bake for 45 minutes to an hour. Alright, I forgot to do one thing. I want to grate pepper onto this. You can grate pepper between the layers as well. It's obvious that my lid is not going to sit on there very well. It'll be kind of rocking on top of that pile of pasta. So I have oiled a sheet of aluminum foil. And I'll dome that on top, and now that's ready to go into the oven. And there it is, fresh from the oven. I don't know how well you can see this, but I can see bubbling around the edges. To get this bubbling hot, I put this in the oven, left it in the oven for just over an hour, about an hour and 10 minutes. So now I need to let this cool down a little bit, and then we'll be ready to eat. Oh, I've been anticipating this now for quite some time. Nice and stringy with the cheese. I knew that was going to taste good because the sauce was so good when I was making the sauce. A bit of the meatball here. Oh, that is magnificent. Okay, excuse me. I have got to go enjoy my baked bisceglie pasta. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.